Hello, what is going on, guys? Hockey Guy 1 here. Welcome to my review of Shrek Forever After. So Shrek Forever After is directed by Mike Mitchell and stars Mike Myers, Eddie Murphy, Cameron Diaz, Antonio Banderas, Julie Andrews, and Walt Thorne. So the story is about Shrek, who is getting tired of his own life with his kids, so he ends up flipping out at their party and deciding to deal with Rumpelstiltskin to go back to his old life for a day, and until he realizes that that was a mistake, because he gave away the day that he was born, and now he has to try and make love with Fiona again before he dies and disappears altogether. The voice acting is really good. All of them return, like Mike Myers, Eddie Murphy, Antonio Banderas, and Cameron Diaz all return just as great as they do in the other film. They all still feel really confident in their roles and still is into them despite it being the fourth time. Also, Walt Thorne does do a pretty good job as Rumpelstiltskin does feel like the character. He does seem like he's having a lot of fun in it. His voice acting is really kind of like feeling he's into the character despite not exactly having the best script. And there were like one or maybe two jokes that were actually funny in the movie, so there was at least that to it. The animation is still fantastic. You can really see the character designs have come a long way since the first movie. Shrek still has the same outline, but it looks a lot better than it does as the movies progress. Even it just makes it look better, and even still look fine, and just everything really looks fine at the animation. I mean, they did change a few like backdrops, like Far Far Away does look a bit different if you look at it from the overview of this, but it still looks fine. And just looking at this one, I still have that kind of feeling of it, and just everything they really put into it, like in this alternate universe, still looks really good and complete. And as imaginative as it is in the previous. And then one song in the soundtrack, On Top of the World, does actually work pretty well into that, as Shrek is first into that moment, feeling like he's on top of the world after that, because he doesn't really know anything about the two, and now he's going back to his old life, so it at least works in that context of the movie. With that said, this movie does have a lot of problems with it. The story is just a complete mess, completely derails a lot of things that were set up from the previous movie. For example, Shrek's more accepted as the movie came. Now for some reason he's sick of it and wants to go back to his old boring life. It really derails things that were set up in the previous three films, and the biggest problem with this film, it does that a lot in its story, where it just kind of backtracks stuff that were set up in previous films, especially the last one. It ignores a lot of things that happened in the last one. A lot of the characters didn't really come back in it. I get appeal and really like it, but it still doesn't really excuse that the filmmakers can just completely ignore that it ever happened, especially since they do have these ogre babies which came in the last movie, so it's not like they're completely ignoring it. Plus, a lot of the things that just really don't work about this is just that its entire idea just honestly it could have become something much better, but the issue is what they decided to do just really didn't end up working well for the movie at all. It's just where it's like, oh, you take away the day that he was born, so he's gonna die, and it just feels really forced as it goes through, because Shrek's just trying to force down a relationship with Fiona despite them not really caring for each other that much in this alternate universe. Sad, because in that alternate universe there's so much potential that you could have done with it, but what they decided to do with it just didn't end up working. The whole structure behind the story is just, again, really just a mess. Starts off already just showing being repetitive, moving the same thing every single day over and over and over again, which it does kind of get self-aware with showing that Shrek's annoyed by it, but it still doesn't excuse that it gets really annoying, because not only is it just the same things, it repeats the same jokes like 5 times in a row, because they keep showing the same thing every single day, and just doesn't really excuse it. With that, a lot of the stuff that happens after this with Shrek just doesn't really justify it just because he's annoyed by it. It doesn't mean he can like, go into a birthday party and just completely wreck something just because he's annoyed with everything. It just really, again, like I mentioned earlier, it just derails this whole thing of everything that was set up in the last movie. He cares about he has a family now, he has a wife, he has a lot of things that he can care about now, and his character's completely changed since the first movie when he's just alone and just a scary eye, and now for some reason he wants to go back to that, even though his life was a lot more depressing then. It's just doesn't make sense at all, especially since this is supposed to be like a conclusion to this entire saga, and it just doesn't really work for it, because again, it just backtracks a lot of things. It just feels like they didn't really have much of an idea for this, so instead they decided to do something that completely ignores that the last movie happened, especially since the whole way the main plot gets set up, just they didn't really know how to piece it together. The only thing that happened is just Rumpelstiltskin being in the right place at the right time. They didn't really know how to start out and piece it together. Rumpelstiltskin wasn't really much already, and he's already in the right spot at the right time, and then Shrek's so convinced by this deal that he immediately signs it. It's just so out of touch and character of him because of how much he's learned from the last 3 movies, and now he wants to go back to his old life. It just makes no sense. It's just really sad to see how much they backtracked the character just in the first act alone. The second act is probably the worst part of it. I mean, it just really drags along a lot of this because it seems like they had an idea but not really much else. Like, they just had like an idea on paper but didn't really know how to bring it out. So then he's in there, he scares people, then he gets captured and goes to Rumpelstiltskin, decide to reveal the stuff about the plot, and it's just then he realizes he makes a mistake and wants to go back to his life. Like, not even because he actually cares that he destroyed the cake or anything. He just wants to go back to his old life because he signed this deal that he knew nothing about. And it's just, it really makes no sense. I mean, again, huge derailment. Shrek's not like this. This is plot that really happens. It's just stuff like you go in there and ogres want to revolt against him because now that Rumpelstiltskin is the king of far, far away, because Shrek's things apparently made it so that King Harold and Queen Lillian signed this one deal, despite the fact that really makes no sense to have happened, because A, why would King Harold and Queen Lillian care so much about that to the point where they'd give up their whole kingdom, especially since at the beginning it really showed that it just happened from a coincidence, really. I mean, it's another one of those things they didn't really know how to piece together, so they just put that in there because they knew that some sort of trouble had to happen in this alternate universe, so they needed that to happen. Now that he's underneath the ground, Fiona doesn't even know him, obviously, and Fiona doesn't even believe that he's true love, and now he's just trying whatever he can to try and force the relationship down, and I'm just like, please. It's just really drags the plot along because it seems like they didn't know what to do with it, so they decided to just drag it along by having him try and force the relationship instead of actually trying to develop a new relationship under, which is what they should have done. And it's just really annoying because I know this franchise is much better than this and could do much better than that. With that, they have dance system because of the Pied Piper was really useless, and Rumpelstiltskin even doesn't really do much. They have this thing where Fiona is captured and all the ogres are captured because they were all caught. Turns himself in for some reason and wishes to free all ogres. Why does he really care about them? I mean, he doesn't even know anything. And then it just turns into another thing where they just try to enforce the relationship down. And then you have the whole climax happen where Rumpelstiltskin gets caught, and then apparently they kiss each other, and it works because the plot demanded it. I can't even tell you anything else other than that. It just happened because the plot demanded it. Half the time they did not feel like they had the same chemistry as they did first 2 movies where they actually developed that relationship. It just doesn't work in the same way as in this movie. They've tried to force it down. They don't really develop the relationship at all, so it just feels forced because the plot needs it to happen for it to be successful in what they're trying to do, because they need a happy ending. They have chemistry, they didn't like each other. In fact, literally like 20 minutes before this, they had that didn't work because they're not in love with each other in this universe, so it doesn't make sense. It just needed to have a happy ending, because I don't know, with the kids, I mean, I have that he's learning it now that he's back into that, but really, he didn't really learn that much. I mean, it just really feels like they could have done so much more with a plot like this. The pacing is really bad because the movie doesn't piece together very well. It makes the movie feel so much longer than what it is, and just a lot more dreadful to sit through because of how poorly the movie pieces together. Shrek is a really awful character. Like I mentioned earlier, he really gets derailed in this movie. Again, like I mentioned earlier, in the last 3 movies, He started off as just a boring man with a depressing life, scares people, and over time, marrying Fiona, actually trying to get along and make some new friends along the way, and even ended up having his own kids. And now, for some reason, just because he's sick and tired of that life, he wants to go back to his original life. It just doesn't even make sense, and it feels like he's going backwards in character because the noise of his life. I mean, he even goes as far as going at Fiona, wishing he never rescued her and destroying the cake way too far with it, and just backtracks his character so much because of signing the deal with Rumpelstiltskin because he's sick of this life. But when he made a mistake with that and forced the relationship down without any chemistry in this, but he tries to force it down. You can see Fiona was not into him in this universe because she's different. He doesn't really develop. The closest thing he has to development, he realizes he made a mistake after the fact that he put himself in this danger to begin with, feels bad about it, then tries to get back with Fiona. At the end, gives the toy back to his own kid, and that's the closest thing to development. Being honest, if that's considered character development, it's completely forced upon in this movie because of the fact that Shrek got backtracked to begin with, and B, he just doesn't really anything to really learn anything besides the fact that he realized he made a mistake. Donkey honestly could have been entirely scratched out of this movie and nothing really would have changed that much. He's basically useless to the plot. I mean, he barely does anything. He's just singing for a little wit, and obviously doesn't know Shrek, and acts like he's friends with Shrek. He's just there to crack a bunch of cringeworthy jokes in this, which he basically does. I mean, at least in the movies before this, he at least had some sort of purpose in helping Shrek. In this one, he doesn't really serve much of a purpose. He's just there because, well, he was in the previous three. Now, all he really is doing is cracking jokes, and that's about it. Puss in Boots is also an awful character. In this alternate universe, again, they don't exactly do much with him. I mean, he's the closest thing to them doing much with him out of the original thing than he was even in the original movie. Because at least in this one, okay, they show that he knows about Fiona's curse in this alternate universe, but doesn't really do it from there, just because a pet of Fiona who knows about his curse doesn't really go too much further than that. Enough with them for me to really care about him in this alternate universe. Fiona is not very good at all in this movie. Compared to Shrek, she doesn't has to be real, but in this alternate universe, they do express that she has a different character, which is quite obvious. In this, she just got tired of waiting and escaped the castle and is now this leader of the ogres to try and get back at Rumpelstiltskin. And honestly, I'm just kind of confused on what exactly that character is. They don't really go too much further other than that. Plus, like I said before, she really doesn't like Shrek in this universe. She doesn't have the same chemistry at all. You can see it. She's completely a different character. She's more of a warrior in this universe than she is in the main, and it just shows that that's mainly what she cares about. She's not interested in Shrek at all, but then for some reason at the end they're like, oh yeah, she's in him now because, well, we need it to happen. The plot needs it to happen. That's why. And that's the thing about her character. Like, I wish they did more with it other than just show that she's more of a warrior and see they can really develop her with Shrek and actually give them more chemistry with each other. That would have been a much better movie. Rumpelstiltskin is a really awful villain. He really does not have much to him. I mean, they act like he has a plan, but it really isn't much of a plan. It's just hoping things happen the way he needs it to happen. Coincidence kind of fashion. I mean, he doesn't really have much of a plan. He's on being the right place at the right time and hoping that Shrek is as mad as he is at that right time. There just isn't really much of a plan. I mean, he just wants to get back at Shrek because apparently King Harold and Queen Jillian was that close to signing a deal that coincidentally got stopped right when he tried to save Fiona. And yeah, it just doesn't make sense. I mean, why did he want to do it? I don't know. It just doesn't make sense. I mean, apparently it was a part of his plan, but, it just happened to happen right at the moment. Just doesn't even work. I mean, that's how he wanted to come back as the kingdom, but all it really relied on is being, coincidentally, Shrek being mad at the right time, and him being there in the right place at the right time. There's just a non-existent plan, and other than that, he doesn't really do much in this movie other than just order people to do stuff, and it's just, again, a villain that isn't really intimidating because everything that his plan relies on is coincidences, so he doesn't really have much to it. The humor in general is just really not funny. I mean, there may be 2 jokes that I found funny, but other than that, it's just really dreadful. I mean, Donkey and Puss do crack a lot of jokes that I find really cringeworthy most of the time, and especially the ones that Donkey does, like the redonkulous and catastrophe thing. That's just a cat and donkey pun that just really feels forced on you. It's just haha because they're a donkey and a cat. It's not really funny. It's just, a lot of it, the humor in this movie just did not hit with me. Soundtrack most of the time doesn't work other than the one song that I mentioned earlier that actually worked, but I Am a Believer that they use for it. It just, honestly, there's something about this cover of it that just doesn't really feel as exciting. The same song with the cover, and like, it just doesn't really feel as exciting to it. I don't exactly know what it is. It just doesn't feel very as exciting as the cover in the original movie from Smash Mouth. I mean, it's supposed to be for a happy ending, but again, because it's a different cover, there's something about it that just doesn't really work this movie, and it just doesn't make it sound as exciting. So overall, Shrek Forever After is an awful movie that completely derails Shrek's character and has a story that really is just an idea that just has things that don't really piece together very well. So I'm gonna give Shrek Forever After a 3 out of 10. That was my review of Shrek Forever After. What are your thoughts on Shrek Forever After? Tell me in the comments below. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.